Hi, I'm Jen Heller, and this is Harold, and this is Perfect by Jen Heller. Part 1, The Industry. Chapter 2, Feel the Pain. The Industry was built out of a rundown sports stadium that the old folks still called the Vet. The arena had been converted into a giant factory where hundreds of prisoners worked 20-hour shifts in sweltering heat to produce supplies for the military. Under the stadium was a massive mine where even more prisoners dug, pried, and chopped day and night to supply raw materials for the factory. The government provided a steady stream of labor to the Industry by imprisoning anyone who opposed them. Sam Cross, founder and owner of the Industry, had a standing federal contract that allowed him to do as he pleased, and he took advantage of it in every way he could. Kenny and Frank dragged April down through the spiraling halls of the Industry to the cellar, a circular room with concrete walls and no windows. It was lit by a single globe light in the middle of the ceiling, so that the outer edges were shrouded in chilling darkness. Crystal waited at the other end of the room. The globe light shined on her face as she turned a wooden crank on the wall, and chains with leather straps descended from the ceiling. "Over here, boys," she said in her childlike voice. The two men dragged April forward. She stepped back and tugged hard with both arms, jerking them backward and sending a rush of pain up her broken right arm. The men let go of her and she ran for the stairs. Kenny ran after her and wrapped his massive hands around her waist. She kicked at him fiercely. He threw her face first into a concrete wall and twisted her left arm behind her back. "What did I tell you, imperfect?" he growled in her ear. "I said if you kept it up, I would break your other arm." He twisted harder until her arm snapped. She gasped and slid down the wall, scraping her face on the rough concrete. Kenny yanked her up and dragged her toward Crystal, who looked on smiling. "Ooh, a feisty one," Crystal said with a giggle, a thin tinkling sound like a broken bell. "I like that." The men secured the straps around April's wrists, and Crystal turned the crank. The chains ascended to the ceiling, lifting April up off the floor and hanging her full weight on her two broken arms. She writhed and panted in pain as the men secured a second set of straps around her ankles. Crystal grinned with her lipstick-splotched teeth. "As an imperfect, you're probably used to pain from this lovely example of modern technology," she said, tapping the bracelet on April's suspended right wrist. "I prefer antique torture devices because they're not just painful, they're humiliating, degrading, dehumanizing. They reduce a person to something less than human, an animal, a thing. They make them feel small, helpless, worthless." She stepped out of the light and disappeared into the surrounding darkness. "Then again, you're probably used to that too, but I bet you're not used to this." April heard the distinct sound of a whip cracking and felt her heart race. Crystal strolled back into the light, holding a long black whip and smiling. She brushed the whip along April's face. It felt rough and sharp against her skin, like sandpaper covered in tiny bits of broken glass. "This is one of my favorites," Crystal said with another tinny giggle. "The rough texture rips the skin as it lashes. I'm told it's really, really painful." Cold fear swept April and she shivered, momentarily forgetting the pain in her arms. She felt beads of sweat form on her forehead and drip down her face. Crystal stepped behind her and took a knife out of the holster on her waistband. She roughly cut open the back of April's shirt and unfastened her bra. She ran her hand down April's bare back. "Such beautiful, soft skin," she said. "I almost don't want to mess it up." "Almost." She giggled again. April shut her eyes tightly and held her breath. She heard the whip crack and felt it lick her back like a snake's tongue. At first she felt nothing. Then the pain came in an intense wave. She felt a scream fighting its way to her lips and clenched her teeth to stifle it. "You're a tough little thing," said Crystal's high-pitched voice behind her. "I love a challenge." She swung the whip again, then again, then again. April tried to hold back another scream, but it came out as a strained whimper. Crystal stepped in front of her and examined her face. "How does it feel?" she asked with a sinister smile. "Would you believe it hurts?" April asked in a trembling voice. Crystal giggled. "How much does it hurt?" she asked. "Is it the worst pain you've ever felt in your life?" April shook her head. The smile faded from Crystal's face. "Is it the second worst?" April shook her head again. "Third?" April shrugged and nodded. Bullshit, Crystal exclaimed angrily. Everyone else says it's the worst. Sorry to disappoint you, April said through clenched teeth. I've had worse. We'll have to do something about that. Crystal disappeared behind April again. She swung the whip several times in quick succession, then paused. A wave of pain swept over April and she gasped and wheezed. Tell me that's not the worst pain you've ever felt, Crystal said under her breath. She swung the whip again, and again, and again. April felt like the skin on her back was being peeled like an orange. She struggled to breathe. Her throat felt thick, blocking her airway. The whip swung again and again. April fought to hold back her screams, but one slipped through, a weak, coarse sound, like fingernails scratching a chalkboard. That's it, sweetie, Crystal said between swings. Scream for me. She laughed, not her usual thin, tinny giggle, but a full, deep, bellowing laugh, pushed forcefully from her diaphragm and up through her throat, growing and swelling until it exploded from her thin lips like a mushroom cloud. It was a laugh of unbridled, sadistic pleasure. It seemed like the pain would never end. Minutes felt like hours, and hours felt like days. At some point, April passed out and was shocked back to consciousness by Crystal repeatedly slapping her face. You're not getting away from me that easy, Crystal said with a grin. April's whole body trembled in agony. Any minor movement, a twitch, a shudder, a breath, sparked another wave of pain. Her head pounded and her eyelids felt so heavy that she couldn't hold them open. She was barely aware that she was speaking when she said, "Please, no more, please." Every word hurt, scratching her throat as if she had swallowed a handful of nails. Crystal cooed and shushed her, stroking her face tenderly like she was comforting a frightened child. "But you're doing so well, little one," she said. "No one's ever lasted this long before." She giggled. "What a delightful little surprise you turned out to be. I can't wait to see how much more you can take." "Please," April whispered. "Please let me go." Crystal shushed her again. She produced a damp rag and used it to mop the sweat and tears from April's face. "Oh, sweetie," she said in a soft, faux sweet tone. "I'm never letting you go." A dark grin spread across her orange spray-tanned face. "You're going to die here." "No, please," April said, sniffing to hold back tears. "I can't." "You can't what?" asked Crystal, stroking her cheek. Exhaustion and pain weighed heavily on April's head. The words came out before she realized what she was saying. "I can't die." Crystal's tautly stretched forehead showed a hint of a wrinkle as she attempted to furrow her thin eyebrows. "Of course you can, sweetie," she said. "Don't be silly." "No," April whispered. "I can't." "Don't worry, little one. You'll be begging for death before I'm through." Crystal ran her hand along April's face, caressing her fair skin and stroking her lips with her lacquered fingers. "Such a pretty little thing. It's a shame you have to die." She disappeared behind April again, and the whip cracked in the darkness. Chapter 3, Seether. Debbie and Carmen stood in the middle of Broad Street, squinting in the bright morning sunlight as they stared down at the manhole. Debbie pulled a crowbar out of her flannel shirt and handed it to Carmen. "Open it," she said. Carmen wedged the crowbar under the manhole cover and pushed down, lifting it open. Debbie reached for the cover and paused, leaning her head to one side. "What's that?" she asked. Carmen dropped the manhole cover and looked around. The morning air was still and quiet. The bright sunlight warmed her golden brown skin and made the uneven blacktop sparkle. A symphony of car horns and sirens played softly in the distance. Somewhere a radio blasted "No Diggity" by Blackstreet. A cool breeze carried the scent of greasy cheesesteaks mixed with raw sewage, cigarette smoke, and a dash of fresh urine. It was a typical day in the city. Carmen sighed and stood silently in the street, straining her ears. Scattered shouts and whoops floated over from where the industry sat looming over the city. Carmen looked up at the enormous concrete building. A crowd of people in gray uniforms had amassed in front of it. "The fuck?" she said. The crowd moved as one across the vast parking lot and out into the street. Debbie pulled Carmen into a narrow alley. They watched as throngs of people ran by, yelling and cheering in a blur of color and sound. "What's going on?" Carmen asked. "How the fuck should I know?" Debbie snapped. She reached out into the mob and pulled back a gaunt young man with a shock of red hair and a smattering of freckles across his nose. "Hey," he cried as Debbie shoved him into the alley. "What gives?" "Tell me what's going on," Debbie demanded. "How are all those people running out of the industry?" "The front doors are unlocked," the young man said with a hint of annoyance in his voice. "The doors are unlocked," Debbie echoed. "That's what I said," said the young man. "But that's impossible," said Debbie. "They're locked by a computer. No one can open them except Sam Cross and his security guards." "They're saying someone hacked the main computer and unlocked them," said the young man. "Who?" asked Debbie. "I heard it wasn't imperfect," said the young man. Debbie and Carmen exchanged puzzled glances. "An imperfect," said Debbie. "That's what I said," the young man repeated. "An imperfect that can talk." "A talking imperfect?" "That's what I said. After she opened the door, she was telling everyone to get out." "That's impossible." "Well, that's what everyone's saying. Can I go now?" Debbie released the young man, and he ran out of the alley to join the crowd. Debbie leaned against a brick wall and crossed her arms. "Huh," she said. "Interesting." "What's interesting?" asked Carmen. Debbie drummed her fingers on her arm. "I've gone my whole life seeing maybe 2 imperfects, and in the last week or so, I've seen 1 at the bakery and heard about 1 at the industry." "I only ever saw 1 before the bakery," said Carmen. "What do you think the odds are of us coming across 2 imperfects in 1 week?" Debbie asked. Carmen shrugged. "Maybe 1 in 1,000? "Huh," Debbie said again. Carmen raised her eyebrows. "You think the imperfect from the bakery opened the doors at the industry and let all those people out?" "I think it's very likely," said Debbie. Carmen scoffed. "That kid's full of shit." "Think about it, dipshit," said Debbie. "You said there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that we come across 2 imperfects in 1 week, right? Plus, if the one from the bakery can talk, that explains how Sam found us at the movie theater." "But imperfects can't..." Carmen paused as a barrage of horrifying, ear-splitting screams of terror soared down Broad Street, drowning out the yelling and cheering until only the screams remained. Debbie peered out into the street just as a long black car inched by. She jumped back behind the brick wall. "Shit," she whispered. "It's the feds. We gotta hide." They ran deeper into the alley and crouched in the shadows behind a dumpster, covering their noses to block out the fetid stench of rotting garbage. "What's that?" Debbie whispered, pointing to the corner where the dumpster met the wall. "What's what?" asked Carmen. "Give me your lighter," said Debbie. Carmen took a steel Zippo out of her pocket and handed it to Debbie. Debbie flicked on the lighter and held it in front of the dumpster. Slowly, a figure formed in the dim light, a figure with curly brown hair, fair skin, and big brown eyes. Debbie sneered. "Well, look who it is," she said. "We were just talking about you." She moved the lighter closer, and April's face appeared, her amber brown eyes shining in the flickering flame. She sat huddled in the corner, hugging her knees. Debbie dragged her into the sliver of light from the street. "So, you hacked the main computer, huh?" she said, glaring down at her with fiery eyes. "And apparently you can talk?" April kicked Debbie in the shin. Debbie slammed her against a wall and punched her in the face. April kicked Debbie's legs and tried to squirm out of her grip. Debbie punched her again, then again, then again. April coughed, and blood sprayed from her mouth into Debbie's face, staining her olive skin. Debbie wiped her face with her hand, then punched April a few more times. She grasped her throat and squeezed, lifting her up off the ground. April's eyes grew wide, and her face turned pale as she clawed desperately at Debbie's hand around her neck. "You told him, didn't you?" Debbie hissed through gritted teeth, adding flecks of spit to the blood that spattered April's face. "You told Sam Cross where we went, at the bakery." She loosened her grip slightly, and April took a few shallow breaths. "Tell me," Debbie demanded. "Tell me what you did." In one swift motion, April brought her hands up to the sides of Debbie's face and pressed her thumbs down hard into her eye sockets. Debbie screamed and dropped April onto the cobblestone ground. April scrambled up and ran toward the end of the alley. The torn flaps on the back of her shirt waved in the breeze as she moved. Another long black car drove slowly down the street past the alley. April gasped and flattened herself against the brick wall. Carmen dragged her back across the alley by her hair. Debbie rubbed her eyes. Blood dripped down her face, streaking her flushed cheeks with burgundy stripes. "Scared of the feds, huh?" she said, baring a row of coffee-stained teeth between her pale lips. "Maybe we should hand you over to them." April glanced back and forth between the street and Debbie. Come on, Debbie said, nudging Carmen. Let's take her to see Uncle Sam. They each grabbed one of April's arms and pulled her toward the street. April struggled fiercely against them. Debbie and Carmen held on, dragging her almost to the end of the alley. No, please, April said in a hushed voice. I'll tell you whatever you want. Please don't take me out there. Debbie and Carmen stared at her in shock. Holy crap, said Carmen. That kid wasn't full of shit. Debbie grinned down at April. Tell me what you did. April stared out at the street as a group of men in black suits and dark sunglasses marched by. I hacked the main computer at the industry and unlocked the front doors, she whispered. Speak up, said Debbie. I hacked the main computer and unlocked the doors, April said slightly louder, glancing anxiously at the street. And, said Debbie, tightening her grip on April's arm. And I told that guy Sam that you went to the old movie theater, said April. Debbie's eyes narrowed under her thick eyelashes. I'm sorry, April said, her voice wavering. They were going to kill Cindy. Who? Asked Debbie. Cindy, the bakery owner, said April. They killed her anyway, but... Debbie sighed. I should kill you, she said, and I will. But first, I think I can use you. She pointed at the bracelet on April's wrist. I assume there's a remote for this? And since it hasn't been activated, I'm guessing you have it. She held out her hand and flicked her fingers expectantly. Give it to me. April shook her head. Debbie wrapped her hand around April's throat. Give it to me or I'll kill you. Go ahead, April said stiffly. Kill me. Debbie laughed. You like that, huh? Forget it. Hand it over. April shook her head. Debbie shrugged. Okay, then we're going to the feds. She and Carmen resumed pulling April toward the street. No, April whispered. Please don't. Debbie held out her hand. It's me or the feds, Imperfect, she said. You decide. April looked from Debbie to the street and back to Debbie. She took a deep breath and whispered, It's in my right cargo pocket. Debbie took the remote from April's pocket and smiled. Good choice, she said, turning up the dial on the side of the remote. This is for talking to Sam. She pressed the big red button on the remote. April gasped and collapsed. Debbie and Carmen held her up. She panted and struggled to pull away. Carmen cleared her throat. Debbie, she said, don't you think that's enough? Shut up, Debbie hissed. She waited a few more minutes, then pushed the button again and turned off the remote. She glared down at April. Now you're going to be a good girl and do as you're told so I don't have to do that again, right? April nodded. What? Said Debbie, cupping her hand behind her ear. Yes, said April. Yes, ma'am, said Debbie. Yes, ma'am, April repeated through clenched teeth. Debbie grinned and nudged Carmen with her elbow. Go see if the feds are still out there. Carmen crept to the end of the alley and slowly stretched her head around the wall. It's coming, Crazy Al cried as he shoved his way past Carmen and into the alley. Judgment Day is coming. Jesus Christ, Al, said Carmen, catching her breath. You scared the shit out of me. They play God, Al shouted. They manipulate our minds and bodies to control us. They decide who lives and who dies. They will make us all soldiers in their endless wars. Debbie groaned. Are you following us or something? Get the fuck out of here. Al turned to Debbie and froze as his milky eyes focused on April. He stared down at her, clutching the edges of his cardboard sign until they accordioned in his hands. You, he said softly, you know what they're doing, but you can't say. He looked up at Debbie and laughed shrilly. She knows, but she can't say. Get rid of him, Carmen, Debbie barked. Come on, you crazy old bastard, Carmen said as she ushered him out of the alley. She knows, Al repeated. She knows, but she can't say. She sure does, said Carmen. April watched Al with sympathetic eyes as he marched down Broad Street shouting, And through covetousness shall they with feigned words make merchandise of you. While they promise liberty, they themselves are the servants of corruption. Carmen stepped back into the alley and nodded at Debbie. It's clear, she said. The feds are gone. She turned to April. What was all that about? Fuck if I know, April said, still staring at Al. Carmen looked into April's luminescent brown eyes and knew instantly that she was lying. Tune in next week for Chapter 4, or if you just can't wait, You can buy a paperback just like this one or 4 ebooks. Check out my website, jenheller.com, to find out where you can get it. Until next week, I'm Jen Heller, this is Harold, and this is Millie.